Throughout history, some crowns are forged in gold, others in blood. But in 1889, when 25-year-old Prince Carlos ascended to the Portuguese throne, historians suggest he inherited something far more dangerous, a kingdom already sentenced to death. The young king, who would rule for barely 19 years before meeting his violent end, had no idea that every decision, every scandal, every moment of weakness would be carefully catalogued by enemies plotting in the shadows. According to contemporary accounts, the Portuguese monarchy was already cracking from within, and Carlos would become both its most controversial ruler and its final victim. Born into the prestigious House of Braganza on September 28, 1863, Carlos appeared destined for greatness. Records indicate his early education was rigorous and comprehensive, designed to prepare him for constitutional monarchy in an increasingly complex Europe. The prince traveled extensively through Italy, Britain, France, and Germany during the 1880s, absorbing modern diplomatic practices and building relationships with European royalty. His marriage to Princess Amélie of Orléans in 1886 seemed to promise stability, uniting Portuguese and French royal bloodlines in what contemporary observers called a politically advantageous match. Yet beneath the glittering ceremonies and diplomatic successes, darker currents were already stirring. Economic historians point to signs that Portugal's financial foundations were becoming increasingly unstable throughout the 1880s. The nation's colonial ambitions in Africa were creating dangerous tensions with Britain, while social unrest was growing among workers and intellectuals influenced by Republican ideologies spreading across Europe. If you're finding this story as compelling as we are, make sure to subscribe for more forbidden royal histories that most people never get to hear. When Carlos officially became King of Portugal in October 1889, following his father Luis I's sudden death, contemporary reports describe a monarch who initially commanded respect and admiration. Diplomatic correspondence from the period reveals that European courts viewed him as intelligent and capable, a ruler who might modernize Portugal while maintaining monarchical traditions. His early years on the throne saw efforts to strengthen Portugal's international position, and he developed particularly close relationships with Britain's King Edward VII and other European sovereigns. But historians analyzing the political climate of the 1890s now recognize ominous patterns that Carlos himself may not have fully comprehended. Republican movements were gaining momentum across Europe, and Portugal's economic vulnerabilities were becoming increasingly apparent to both domestic critics and international observers. Intelligence reports from the period, discovered in Portuguese archives decades later, reveal that anti-monarchist sentiment was already being organized and funded by groups inspired by Republican successes in other nations. The young king, who had once charmed European courts with his diplomatic skills and oceanographic interests, was about to face a series of crises that would systematically destroy his credibility, isolate him from his people, and ultimately transform him from a respected monarch into a target for assassination. Because what Carlos couldn't see coming was that his greatest enemy wouldn't be foreign powers or economic collapse. It would be the explosive scandals brewing within his own palace walls, secrets that would soon make him the most hated man in Portugal. Less than 2 years into his reign, King Carlos I would face a diplomatic catastrophe so devastating that historians mark it as the beginning of his downfall. What happened in January 1890 wasn't just a political crisis. It was a public humiliation that shattered Portuguese pride and painted their young king as weak, incompetent, and unworthy of the crown. According to diplomatic archives, the event that would forever poison Carlos's relationship with his people began with a map, a dream, and Britain's ruthless determination to crush Portugal's colonial ambitions. For decades, Portugal had harbored an ambitious vision called the Pink Map, a grandiose plan to connect their African colonies of Angola and Mozambique through a vast corridor of Portuguese-controlled territory stretching across Central Africa. Contemporary documents reveal that Portuguese politicians and the public had invested enormous national pride in this colonial project, seeing it as proof that their small kingdom could still compete with Europe's great powers. The Pink Map represented more than territory. It symbolized Portugal's refusal to accept decline. But Britain had other plans. On January 11th, 1890, the British government delivered what became known as the British Ultimatum, a diplomatic document that historians describe as one of the most humiliating communications ever sent between European allies. According to official records, Britain demanded that Portugal immediately withdraw all military forces from the territories between Angola and Mozambique, threatening severe consequences if the Portuguese government refused to comply. The language was brutal, the timeline impossible, and the implications clear. Portugal would bow to British demands or face the destruction of their international relationships. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe the public reaction in Lisbon as explosive. Crowds gathered in the streets, burning British flags and calling for war against their former ally. Portuguese intellectuals and politicians who had previously supported the monarchy began questioning whether Carlos possessed the strength and diplomatic skill necessary to defend national honor. Intelligence reports from the period, discovered in Portuguese archives, reveal that Republican agitators immediately seized upon the crisis, using Britain's ultimatum as proof that monarchy had made Portugal weak and subservient to foreign powers. Carlos found himself trapped in an impossible situation. Military experts of the era acknowledged that Portugal simply lacked the naval and military resources to challenge Britain effectively. Economic historians point to evidence that Portugal's financial situation made prolonged international conflict unthinkable. Yet accepting British demands meant abandoning the colonial dreams that had captured Portuguese imagination for generations. According to diplomatic correspondence, Carlos struggled with advisors who offered no viable alternatives to humiliation. On January 21st, 1890, after 10 days of national agony, the Portuguese government officially accepted the British ultimatum. Contemporary accounts describe the announcement as triggering widespread demonstrations against the monarchy. Republican newspapers, previously marginal publications, suddenly found eager audiences among Portuguese citizens who felt betrayed by their king's perceived weakness. According to police reports from the period, anti-monarchist graffiti began appearing throughout Lisbon, with slogans calling Carlos a coward and traitor. The pink map crisis transformed Carlos from a promising young monarch into a figure of national shame. But what the king couldn't comprehend was that this diplomatic disaster had created something far more dangerous than public anger. It had given his enemies their first taste of blood, and they were already planning the financial catastrophes that would push Portugal toward complete collapse. If diplomatic humiliation had wounded Portugal's pride, what happened next would destroy its soul. Just 2 years after the British ultimatum crisis, King Carlos I would face something unprecedented in modern European history. His kingdom would go bankrupt, not once, but twice. According to financial historians, Portugal's economic collapse between 1892 and 1902 represented one of the most catastrophic fiscal disasters ever experienced by a European monarchy, transforming Carlos from a struggling king into a symbol of royal incompetence and national decay. The first bankruptcy declaration came in June 1892, barely 3 years into Carlos's reign. Economic records from the period reveal that Portugal's foreign debt had spiraled completely out of control, reaching levels that made repayment impossible without devastating austerity measures. Contemporary financial documents show that the government owed massive sums to British, French, and German creditors, while domestic spending on colonial administration and military expenses had drained the royal treasury. According to parliamentary records, Portuguese politicians found themselves forced to suspend debt payments and renegotiate terms with humiliated foreign bankers. For ordinary Portuguese citizens, the bankruptcy meant immediate suffering. Archival evidence from municipal records shows that government employees went months without salaries. Public works projects stopped completely, and social services collapsed across the country. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe bread riots in Lisbon and Porto, with desperate families unable to afford basic necessities, while their king continued living in luxury at Belém Palace. Republican organizers, according to police intelligence reports, began spreading propaganda that portrayed Carlos as a parasitic ruler who cared more about palace entertainments than his people's survival. But Carlos's financial disasters were only beginning. Economic historians analyzing the period note that instead of implementing serious reforms, the monarchy continued its expensive lifestyle and colonial commitments, setting the stage for an even more devastating crisis. By 1900, Portugal's financial situation had deteriorated so badly that European creditors were refusing new loans, and the government was surviving on increasingly desperate borrowing arrangements. The second bankruptcy, declared in May 1902, represented what contemporary economists called a complete collapse of Portuguese fiscal credibility. According to official records, Portugal could no longer meet even the reduced debt payments negotiated after the first bankruptcy. Foreign investment in Portuguese enterprises virtually disappeared, while domestic businesses struggled without government contracts or reliable currency. Intelligence reports from the period reveal that European chancelleries began discussing Portugal as a failed state, questioning whether the monarchy possessed the competence necessary for continued independence. Contemporary accounts describe the public reaction as explosive hatred directed personally at Carlos. According to police reports, Republican demonstrations grew larger and more violent throughout 1902, with protesters carrying banners demanding the king's abdication and the establishment of a democratic republic. Socialist newspapers, previously underground publications, began circulating openly with articles describing the monarchy as a criminal enterprise that had bankrupted the nation for personal profit. The financial catastrophes created something far more dangerous than economic hardship. They gave Republican revolutionaries moral authority to argue that monarchy itself was incompatible with modern governance. But what Carlos couldn't see was that his enemies were about to discover the perfect weapon to destroy what remained of his reputation. Scandalous secrets about his private life that would make every Portuguese citizen question whether their king deserved to rule over anyone, anywhere, ever again. While Portugal burned through financial catastrophe and diplomatic humiliation, King Carlos I was secretly living a double life that would become the final nail in his monarchy's coffin. Behind the marble walls of Belém Palace, the king who had sworn sacred vows to his wife, Princess Amélie, was conducting passionate affairs that would produce illegitimate children, fuel devastating gossip, and provide his Republican enemies with the ultimate ammunition against royal credibility. According to contemporary court sources, what began as private indiscretions would transform into public scandals that made Carlos the most morally compromised monarch in Portuguese history. The first affair that shattered royal propriety involved Grimanesa Viana de Lima, a sophisticated Peruvian widow whose beauty and intelligence had captured European high society's attention. Historical records suggest that Grimanesa, widow of a Brazilian diplomat, met Carlos during one of his diplomatic missions and quickly became what contemporary observers described as his most significant romantic obsession. According to documentation discovered in private family archives, their relationship produced a daughter allegedly named Maria Pia, born sometime before 1902, though Carlos would never officially acknowledge her paternity. But Grimanesa wasn't Carlos's only secret passion. Intelligence reports from the period reveal that the king was simultaneously involved with Maria Amélia Laredo e Mursa, a Brazilian woman whose relationship with the Portuguese monarch became one of the most whispered scandals in European court circles. Contemporary sources suggest that this affair also resulted in an illegitimate daughter, born in 1907, and coincidentally also named Maria Pia, creating a situation so scandalous that even Carlos's closest advisors reportedly struggled to manage the fallout. Tell me in the comments what part of this story shocks you the most so far. And if you're enjoying this documentary, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. What made these affairs particularly devastating wasn't just their existence, but how Carlos handled them. According to court documents, the king made no serious efforts to hide his relationships. appearing publicly with both women at various European social events and reportedly showering them with expensive gifts purchased with Portuguese royal funds. Contemporary diplomatic correspondence reveals that foreign ambassadors were writing detailed reports about Carlos's scandalous behavior back to their home governments, making Portugal's king an international laughingstock. The financial implications were staggering. According to treasury records discovered decades later, Carlos was spending enormous sums maintaining separate households for his mistresses and their children, while Portuguese citizens struggled with the economic consequences of national bankruptcy. Republican newspapers, once they learned about these expenditures, began publishing calculated estimates of how much royal adultery was costing the Portuguese people, turning personal scandals into political dynamite. Perhaps most damaging was how Carlos's behavior contrasted with his public image as a Catholic monarch. Contemporary church records show that Portuguese religious leaders were becoming increasingly uncomfortable with their king's open defiance of Christian marriage vows, while ordinary citizens who attended Sunday masses were hearing subtle criticisms of royal morality from priests who had once preached about divine monarchy. The affairs created impossible situations for Queen Amélie, who, according to palace staff accounts, maintained public dignity while enduring private humiliation. Diplomatic reports from the period suggest that other European royal families were beginning to distance themselves from the Portuguese court, viewing Carlos's behavior as embarrassing to monarchical institutions generally. But what Carlos couldn't comprehend was that his romantic indiscretions had given Republican revolutionaries something more powerful than economic arguments or diplomatic failures. They had provided moral justification for revolution, because soon, the palace that had protected his secrets would become a fortress surrounded by enemies who knew exactly how to use a king's weakness against him. By 1906, King Carlos I had achieved something remarkable and terrifying. He had managed to alienate virtually every powerful faction in Portuguese society. What had once been a royal court, filled with loyal nobles, supportive politicians, and devoted military leaders, had transformed into a viper's nest of conspirators, opportunists, and enemies, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. According to contemporary political analysis, Carlos's isolation wasn't accidental. It was the inevitable result of a weak king making desperate alliances with increasingly authoritarian forces that would ultimately destroy both him and the monarchy he was trying to save. The turning point came when Carlos made what historians now recognize as his most catastrophic political decision, placing absolute trust in João Franco, a conservative politician whose authoritarian instincts would transform Portugal into a virtual dictatorship. Contemporary parliamentary records reveal that Franco had convinced Carlos that only iron-fisted rule could save the monarchy from republican revolution, promising to crush dissent through emergency powers and military enforcement. But Franco's dictatorship created exactly the opposite result. Intelligence reports from 1906-1907 show that instead of strengthening royal power, the authoritarian government gave Republican revolutionaries the perfect propaganda tool. They could now argue that monarchy inevitably led to tyranny and oppression. Contemporary newspaper accounts describe how Franco's censorship laws, arbitrary arrests, and suspension of constitutional rights turned moderate Portuguese citizens into active opponents of the royal government. Even more devastating was how Franco's rule isolated Carlos from traditional monarchist supporters. According to diplomatic correspondence, Portuguese nobility, who had previously defended the crown, began privately expressing doubts about Carlos's judgment and political competence. Military officers, traditionally the monarchy's most reliable allies, started questioning whether a king who required dictatorial methods to maintain power deserved their loyalty. The royal court itself became a battlefield of competing factions and hidden agendas. Contemporary accounts from palace staff reveal that Carlos could no longer trust even his closest advisors, many of whom were secretly communicating with Republican organizers or foreign diplomats about the monarchy's likely collapse. According to intelligence files discovered decades later, several high-ranking court officials were actively providing information about royal activities to newspapers and political opponents. Franco's authoritarian measures also created international embarrassment for Portugal. Diplomatic reports from the period show that European governments were expressing concern about Portuguese political stability, with some nations quietly beginning to plan for a post-monarchical Portugal. According to archival correspondence, British and French diplomats were reporting that Carlos had become so politically isolated that his government was essentially surviving through police-state methods rather than popular support. Perhaps most ominously, Franco's dictatorship was creating the very revolutionary conditions it was supposed to prevent. Police reports from 1907 reveal that underground Republican organizations were growing rapidly, fueled by public anger about authoritarian oppression and royal incompetence. According to contemporary intelligence analysis, Carlos's reliance on dictatorial power was convincing ordinary Portuguese citizens that monarchy was fundamentally incompatible with freedom and dignity. The king, who had once commanded respect across Europe, now found himself trapped in a palace surrounded by enemies, defended only by a dictatorial government that made him more hated with each passing day. But what Carlos didn't realize was that his enemies were no longer content with political opposition. They were planning something far more permanent. And the most dangerous conspirators were already gathering in the shadows of Lisbon, preparing to transform their king from a living embarrassment into a dead martyr. There comes a moment in every failing monarchy when the sacred bond between ruler and subjects breaks forever. For King Carlos I, that moment arrived in 1907, when the Portuguese people stopped seeing him as their sovereign and began viewing him as their enemy. According to contemporary social historians, what made Carlos's situation uniquely tragic wasn't that he had lost political support. It was that he had become genuinely despised by ordinary citizens who once believed that kings ruled by divine right. The transformation was so complete that Republican organizers barely needed to convince anyone that monarchy had failed. Carlos had already done their work for them. The hatred was visceral and personal. Contemporary accounts from workers' districts in Lisbon and Porto describe conversations where Carlos's name provoked immediate anger and disgust. According to police reports from the period, even mentioning the king in public spaces could trigger spontaneous demonstrations, with crowds gathering to shout Republican slogans and demand royal abdication. Intelligence surveillance reveals that working-class Portuguese had developed an almost folkloric mythology around Carlos's alleged crimes, with stories of royal excess and corruption spreading through taverns, markets, and factory floors. What made the situation explosively dangerous was how Carlos's scandals had merged with Portugal's economic suffering in the popular imagination. Contemporary newspaper analysis shows that Republican propagandists had successfully convinced citizens that royal adultery and national bankruptcy were directly connected, that Carlos was literally spending Portuguese money on foreign mistresses while his people starved. According to archival evidence, this narrative became so widespread that even educated Portuguese who knew the economic situation was more complex still blamed Carlos personally for their hardships. The strikes and protests that erupted throughout 1907 revealed the depth of anti-monarchical sentiment. Police records describe demonstrations where crowds carried banners calling Carlos a traitor, a thief, and worse. According to contemporary observers, these weren't political rallies organized by Republican leaders. They were spontaneous expressions of popular fury that Republican organizers struggled to control rather than incite. Intelligence reports reveal that government officials were reporting to Franco's administration that public order was becoming impossible to maintain without massive military intervention. Perhaps most devastating for royal credibility was how Carlos had lost the respect of Portuguese women. According to social historians analyzing the period, Carlos's public adultery had created a unique form of moral outrage among Portuguese mothers and wives who saw the king as betraying not just his marriage vows, but the Christian family values that underpinned Portuguese society. Contemporary church records show that priests were reporting conversations where parishioners openly questioned whether God could support a monarchy led by such an immoral man. The psychological impact on Carlos was becoming apparent to those around him. According to palace staff accounts discovered decades later, the king was showing signs of increasing paranoia and isolation, rarely appearing in public and requiring extensive security measures even for routine royal activities. Diplomatic correspondence reveals that foreign ambassadors were reporting that Carlos seemed to understand his situation was hopeless, but appeared psychologically incapable of changing course or abdication. By late 1907, Republican organizers had achieved something unprecedented in Portuguese history. They had convinced ordinary citizens that their king was not just incompetent, but actively evil. But what Carlos couldn't see was that his enemies had moved beyond propaganda and public demonstrations. They were now organizing something far more sinister, and the deadliest conspirators were already preparing to give the Portuguese people exactly what they seemed to want: a Portugal without Carlos. In the shadows of Lisbon's cobblestone streets, where gaslight flickered against ancient walls, a conspiracy was brewing that would forever change European history. By late 1907, King Carlos, I was no longer just facing political opposition or public protests. He was confronting organized revolutionaries who had moved beyond speeches and demonstrations to something far more deadly. According to intelligence archives discovered decades later, the secret societies plotting Carlos's destruction operated with the precision of military organizations and the moral certainty of religious crusaders, convinced that only the king's death could save Portugal from total collapse. The most dangerous organization was the Carbonaria, a secret republican society modeled after Italian revolutionary groups that had successfully overthrown monarchies across Europe. Contemporary police files reveal that the Portuguese Carbonaria had evolved from a small conspiratorial club into a sophisticated underground network with cells throughout Lisbon, Porto, and other major cities. According to intelligence reports, members used coded communications, secret meeting places, and elaborate initiation rituals that bound conspirators together through oaths of absolute loyalty to Republican revolution. But the most chilling evidence of organized regicide came from an unexpected source: Paris. According to French police records, Portuguese Republican exiles had been meeting regularly at Café Brabant on Boulevard Poissonnière throughout 1907, developing detailed plans for what they called the liquidation of the head of government. Intelligence correspondence reveals that these meetings included not just Portuguese conspirators, but French revolutionaries experienced in political assassination, creating an international network dedicated to Carlos's destruction. The sophistication of the plot was terrifying. According to evidence discovered in assassin Manuel Buissa's home after his death, conspirators had been conducting detailed surveillance of royal activities, mapping Carlos's movements and identifying vulnerable moments when the king would be exposed to attack. Contemporary intelligence analysis shows that the conspirators understood they needed to kill not just Carlos, but his heir, Prince Luís Filipe, as well, ensuring that the Portuguese succession would be completely disrupted. What made the conspiracy particularly dangerous was how it combined ideological extremism with practical expertise. Police files reveal that Manuel Buissa was a former army sergeant and expert marksman whose military training made him uniquely qualified for assassination. According to military records, Buissa possessed precisely the skills necessary to execute accurate shots under pressure, while his Republican fanaticism provided the motivation to risk certain death for political revolution. The conspirators also demonstrated remarkable intelligence about royal security procedures. According to palace security reports, the assassins somehow knew that Carlos would be traveling through Terreiro do Pacho in an open carriage with minimal protection on February 1st, 1908. Intelligence historians analyzing the evidence decades later have suggested that the conspirators must have had inside information about royal travel plans, implying that the conspiracy reached into the palace itself. Perhaps most ominously, the plot enjoyed significant popular support among Lisbon's working classes. Police surveillance reports reveal that while most citizens didn't know specific details about assassination plans, many openly expressed hope that someone would do something about Carlos. According to intelligence analysis, The conspirators operated within a social environment where regicide was viewed not as murder, but as patriotic liberation. By January 1908, intelligence officials were reporting to Franco's government that revolutionary activity had reached unprecedented levels, with multiple plots apparently being developed simultaneously. But what terrified security experts most was how confident the conspirators seemed, as if they knew something that government officials didn't, as if they possessed information that made Carlos's death inevitable rather than merely possible. On January 30th, 1908, King Carlos I of Portugal committed an act so politically suicidal that even his closest advisors would later describe it as the moment he signed his own execution order. Faced with mounting revolutionary pressure and increasingly desperate to maintain control, Carlos agreed to sign what became known as the January 30th Decree, a law so authoritarian and brutal that it transformed him overnight from an unpopular king into what Republicans could legitimately call a tyrant. According to contemporary witnesses, when Carlos put his signature to the document, he looked up at his ministers and spoke words that would prove horrifyingly prophetic. "I sign my sentence of death, but you gentlemen want it that way." The decree itself represented the complete abandonment of constitutional monarchy in favor of police-state brutality. According to the official text discovered in Portuguese archives, the law authorized the government to deport or exile any individual suspected of attempting to subvert public order without trial, evidence, or legal representation. Contemporary legal analysis reveals that the decree essentially gave Franco's administration unlimited power to eliminate political opposition through legalized kidnapping and imprisonment. The immediate impact was catastrophic for royal credibility. According to newspaper reports from February 1st, 1908, Republican propagandists were already distributing copies of the decree throughout Lisbon, using it as proof that monarchy inevitably led to dictatorship and oppression. Contemporary intelligence reports reveal that even moderate Portuguese citizens who had previously supported constitutional monarchy were expressing outrage that their king had abandoned legal protections that had existed since the 1820s. What made the decree particularly inflammatory was its timing. According to police intelligence gathered in the days before the assassination, revolutionary activity in Lisbon had reached unprecedented levels throughout January 1908. With multiple conspiracies apparently being coordinated for early February. Intelligence historians analyzing the evidence decades later have suggested that Carlos and Franco may have known about specific assassination plots, making the decree a desperate attempt to crush revolutionary organizations before they could strike. But the decree's most tragic irony was that it was never actually implemented. According to administrative records, although Carlos signed the law on January 30th, government bureaucrats had not yet published it in the official gazette when the king was assassinated on February 1st. Contemporary analysis suggests that Carlos had sacrificed his remaining political legitimacy for emergency powers that never actually took effect, destroying his moral authority for absolutely nothing. The psychological impact on Carlos was apparent to everyone around him. According to palace staff accounts, the king spent January 31st in what witnesses described as a state of profound depression and anxiety, as if he understood that his political situation had become hopeless. Even more ominous were intelligence reports reaching the palace throughout January, suggesting that revolutionary plots were accelerating rather than being deterred by authoritarian measures. The king, who had once believed he could save his monarchy through increasingly desperate measures, had instead created the perfect justification for regicide. Because in the minds of his Republican enemies, Carlos was no longer just a failed king. He was a tyrant who had forfeited any claim to divine protection or political legitimacy. And tomorrow they would prove that Portuguese bullets were stronger than royal blood. February 1st, 1908, began like any other winter morning at the ducal palace of Vila Viçosa, where King Carlos I and his family had been enjoying what would become their final hunting season together. According to contemporary accounts, the royal family had spent a peaceful week in the Alentejo countryside, away from the political storms raging in Lisbon, seemingly unaware that Republican assassins were already positioning themselves in the capital for what they called the final solution to Portugal's monarchical problem. As Carlos prepared to return to his palace, he was walking directly into the most carefully planned regicide in European history. The journey back to Lisbon followed the established royal protocol that would prove catastrophically predictable. According to official travel records, the royal party took a train from Vila Viçosa to Barreiro, then crossed the Tagus River by steamer to disembark at Cais do Sodré in central Lisbon. Contemporary witnesses described the mood as relaxed, with Carlos appearing in good spirits despite the political tensions that had dominated recent months. Intelligence reports later revealed that Republican conspirators had been monitoring royal travel plans for weeks, using this information to position themselves perfectly for assassination. At approximately 6 o'clock in the evening, the royal carriage began its fateful journey through Lisbon toward Belém Palace. According to police records, the carriage contained Carlos, Queen Amélie, Crown Prince Luís Felipe, and Prince Manuel, traveling in an open vehicle with minimal security protection despite months of intelligence warnings about assassination plots. Contemporary observers noted that only a single mounted officer accompanied the royal family, a security arrangement that would prove tragically inadequate within minutes. As the carriage entered Terreiro do Paço, the great square facing the Tagus River, Republican assassins Manuel Buissa and Alfredo Costa were waiting among the sparse crowd. According to eyewitness accounts, Buissa emerged from his position behind the royal carriage, removed a Winchester carbine rifle hidden under his overcoat, and knelt approximately 8 meters from the king. The first shot rang out at precisely 6:15 p.m., striking Carlos in the neck and killing him instantly. The attack unfolded with terrifying efficiency. According to contemporary police reports, after shooting the king, Buissa fired additional shots that mortally wounded Crown Prince Luís Felipe, while Alfredo Costa jumped onto the carriage step and fired point-blank shots into Carlos's body to ensure his death. Eyewitness accounts describe Queen Amélie desperately trying to shield her family with her handbag, while Prince Manuel suffered minor wounds but survived the assault. Within minutes, both assassins were dead, killed immediately by police and bystanders who responded to the attack. According to official records, an innocent bystander named João da Costa was also shot dead in the confusion that followed. The royal carriage, now carrying 2 dead members of Portugal's royal family, was rushed to the nearby Navy arsenal, where Prince Luís Felipe died approximately 20 minutes after the attack. The immediate aftermath was chaos. According to newspaper accounts from February 2nd, crowds gathered throughout Lisbon with reactions ranging from shocked silence to barely concealed celebration. Intelligence reports reveal that Republican organizers had prepared for this moment, immediately distributing propaganda declaring that Portugal was finally free from monarchical tyranny. In less than 5 minutes, the conspiracy that had been brewing for months had succeeded beyond its organizers' wildest expectations. Carlos I was dead, his heir was dead, and 18-year-old Prince Manuel would inherit a crown that had already been shattered by Republican bullets, fired in broad daylight in the heart of his father's kingdom. 18-year-old Prince Manuel never wanted to be king. On February 1st, 1908, as he sat in a blood-stained carriage watching his father and brother die from Republican bullets, he inherited the most cursed crown in Europe, a throne that had already been rejected by his people, and a monarchy that existed only because the assassins had failed to kill him too. According to contemporary observers, Manuel II would rule Portugal for exactly 2 years and 9 months, making him the shortest reigning monarch in Portuguese history and the last king of a dynasty that would die with him in revolutionary flames. The young king's reign was doomed from its first moments. According to intelligence reports from February 1908, Republican organizers were already planning their next move, while Carlos's blood was still fresh on Terreiro do Paço's cobblestones. Contemporary newspaper analysis reveals that the assassination had made monarchy appear vulnerable and mortal, rather than divine and eternal. Manuel tried desperately to save his inheritance. According to palace records, he immediately dismissed João Franco and attempted constitutional reforms designed to win back popular support. Contemporary political analysis shows that the young king made genuine efforts to modernize Portuguese governance and address the economic problems that had destroyed his father's credibility. But it was far too late for moderate solutions to revolutionary problems. The Republican movement had tasted blood and wanted more. According to police intelligence from 1909-1910, revolutionary organizations were growing bolder, using Carlos's assassination as proof that monarchies could be destroyed through organized violence. Contemporary propaganda analysis reveals that Republican newspapers were portraying Manuel not as a legitimate ruler, but as a temporary obstacle to Portuguese freedom. The revolution that would end Portuguese monarchy forever began on October 4th, 1910, with a military uprising in Lisbon. According to military records, rebel forces quickly seized strategic positions, while loyalist troops either joined the rebellion or abandoned their posts. Contemporary accounts describe Manuel's government collapsing within hours, unable to find soldiers willing to fight for a crown that had lost all moral authority. Manuel II's exile was swift and final. According to official records, he fled Portugal on October 5, 1910, boarding the royal yacht Amelia and sailing into permanent exile. He would spend the rest of his life in England, married but childless, the last representative of a dynasty that had ruled Portugal since 1640. The irony of Carlos I's legacy was breathtaking. The king who had tried so desperately to save his monarchy through authoritarian measures, scandalous affairs, and political repression had instead created the perfect conditions for Republican revolution. According to historical analysis conducted decades later, every crisis that destroyed Carlos had been either unavoidable or the result of his own catastrophic decisions. The monarchy Carlos had died trying to preserve was gone forever, destroyed by a king whose scandalous life and violent death had convinced an entire nation that some crowns deserved to be shattered. If you've been captivated by this tragic story of royal destruction, subscribe now for more forbidden histories that reveal the human cost of absolute power. Because the most devastating truths are often the ones that dynasties tried hardest to hide.